Welcome to another episode of Chat with Chatto.
Hey guys, how you doing? Steve Chatto. Welcome to another episode of Chat with Chatto. It's been almost 2 years since I made one of these videos. Can you believe it? And I got inspired to get involved again, to start making these videos, to start helping people. So now I have my own Chat with Chatto YouTube channel. So obviously, click subscribe, all that great stuff they ask you to do. But at the end of the day, over the past 2 years, I'm still talking to people. I'm still trying to help people, explain to them how things work, investing, landlording, wholesaling. And it's like, I had a conversation recently with a gentleman, and I'm like, wow, I could really help so many more people if I get these things recorded and I put it out there for you. So I decided to jump back in, and I'm going to do an episode every week. That's my commitment to you guys. And hopefully I can provide some good content. And again, I'm just a regular guy. I'm a regular full-time real estate investor, and I'm not an accountant. I'm not an attorney. I'm not, an investment broker. I'm just, this isn't investment advice. It isn't legal advice. It's just me giving you my opinion for your entertainment. And one of the things that I put together was a Facebook mastermind group, which is linked below. And you can also get a copy of the contracts that at least I use in my business. I have a Facebook mastermind group. And there's a guy, Jake, and he came onto the Facebook mastermind group and he said, hey, how does this work? I had some questions about some assignments and some other stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, gee, this is a pretty complicated thing to unpack with writing a text. I'm like, let me make a video. You know what? Hey, man, Jake, you want to get on a call with me? Let's get on a Zoom call. I'll answer all your questions and let me put the content out there to help other people. And he was like, yeah, man, let's do it. So we sat down, we recorded this Zoom call, and he asked me all the questions like he had floating around in his mind in the entire transaction from A to Z, as far as opening the title and dealing with the deposits and dealing with the contracts and dealing with the buyers, like the whole piece A to Z. He had a lot of questions on. There was a couple things that just weren't clicking. Like it made sense as a concept, but there's a lot of little things that were not hitting right for him. So he let me record the call, and here it is following. So hopefully you get value out of this. It's going to be following this little introduction, and my commitment to you guys is to put out a video every week. And obviously I want to answer your questions. So the best way to get your questions answered is get into the Facebook group. The link is going to be below. I'm in there pretty regularly. Every single day I'm in there, and I can answer any questions for you. And then the other piece of it is, if you can shoot me an email. You can hit me up at questions@chatwithchatto.com. You can go to the website and get more information there, which is, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to help you in any way I can. And so I guess, without further ado, enjoy this episode of Chat with Chatto. So cool. So this is Steve Chatto with Chat with Chatto, and I am here with Jake. He is a member of my Facebook mastermind, and he had some questions that took a little bit more to answer than some quick typing. So I figured I'd jump on Zoom with him and have a conversation. How you doing, Jake?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. So, so real quick, I know you were asking some questions about the assignment process and that kind of thing. How can I help you?
Yeah, so I started my first real wholesale campaign and been getting some calls in. I'm working my first lead, but I decided to keep that one for myself, and I'm going to do it as a flip. So I have a couple other prospects that are, I think, pretty good, but I'm just getting nervous about the little details where it comes to wholesaling, as far as the assignment contract, as far as the working with the title company, negotiating your fee with the end buyer, those types of things. So I feel like that it would help me understand it better and answer all these little detailed questions if you were to basically use one of your own personal situations and from start to finish kind of explain and break down every part of it. And then if I could be able to stop you at certain parts to make sure that, I'm making sure that all the little nitty gritty detail questions I have are getting answered, as far as did you send that contract? Did the title company send that? Did you start this communication? Yep. Did the end buyer do it? So kind of looking to answer those questions that I feel don't get answered in the classic, like, how do you wholesale? And it's like, I understand the general process, but it's like, what about the little stuff that nobody talks about?
Gotcha. Okay, cool. just real quick before I get into a deal, how many mailers did you send out?
So I sent out 1,000, and I targeted out-of-state owners, property owners. So, and I've gotten about, I think, 12 responses, and filter some of those down, and really about 4 or 5 serious ones. So it's gone well. I was surprised when the calls started pouring in. I got like one a day for about 2 weeks, and that was kind of overwhelming. Like, holy crap, people are calling back.
Nice. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you take action, right? So
yeah, it's true.
So let's run through a deal. Just trying to think of one to put in my head here that'll kind of draw out everything. I don't want to make it complicated. I want to do a nice simple one. So okay, I got a deal in my mind. So obviously, just kind of a real quick overview to start. Obviously, wholesaling is you call up the seller, you go, you look at the house, whatever you need to do to get a house under contract to purchase it, right? And then you assign that contract, which basically means you are selling your rights to that contract to somebody else, right? So in its purest form, right, I would go get a property under contract with, with John, let's say. So I have a contract with John to buy his house for $100,000. Let's say I'm going to assign it to Bob for, for a total of 110, so 100 purchase price and 10,000 assignment fee. So now Bob, theoretically, the way, the purest form would be is Bob would just give me $10,000, right? And I would assign the contract to him, and then Bob would go to title and close, right? Because I'm assigning my interest. I no longer have interest in the property once I do that assignment in the purest form, right? In reality, right, who's going to want to get, and I know people do it, and I know purists are into that, but in reality, for me, even as a buyer, I don't want to give somebody $10,000, or I don't want somebody to give me $10,000 if, for example, there's a title issue that comes up and the thing falls apart, right? So it's almost like a contingent assignment, but in its purest form, really, it's contingent, but in its purest form, like you're just giving them the contract. They're stepping into your shoes and you're walking away. That would cause a lot of confusion for the buyer, for the seller, and without you being in the middle, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So that being said, the way I structure it is I get the property under contract with an AB contract. That AB contract is assignable. Then when I find Bob, the final buyer, I get it under contract with him with the BC contract, right? So I technically could double close. That keeps me in the middle. But my BC contract has a wording in it that says I can convert it to an assignment as long as Bob's total price is the same, right? So a couple things that are happening there is, number one, Bob doesn't know how much of a fee I'm making. He doesn't know if I have it locked up for $50,000 or $100,000, right? So I'm not in a position where when I'm negotiating with Bob, the buyer, I'm not in a position where I have to negotiate my fee. I only have to negotiate the purchase price that works for Bob. Doesn't matter what I have it for, right? I'm also in the position where I have not fully assigned the contract yet, so I'm still in the middle, right? So that puts me, so I'm able to stay in control of the deal, right? So, okay, I'm thinking of another deal. So that's kind of the outline of it, right? But then, okay, well, how do you get to the closing? So when you get towards the closing, I send the assignment. So when I open up escrow, that means when I send the paperwork to the title companies, so they can start their work. I don't make a big announcement, hey, this is going to be an assignment, right? It depends what kind of relationship you have with the title company also. But I just open up the title work as if it's just a regular straight purchase. Then, right, once I have my buyer, usually I have my buyer set before that, but once I have my buyer in place and I get it assigned, or I have the BC contract in place, I send that to the title company, right? So now they have both contracts. They basically update the the buyer from Chatto LLC, they changed that to, Bob the Buyer LLC, right? So all the paperwork that's updated, the purchase price does not change. The purchase price is $100,000, right? The assignment fee is separate, is $10,000. Some title companies will do a blind HUD where only the buyer sees how much he's paying. Some title companies won't. And to be honest with you, I other than one lady that had an attorney, I've never had a buyer question an assignment fee. Because I guarantee you, if you go out and talk to any of your buddies, any of your family, any of your friends, and say, hey, if you're selling your house and there's an assignment fee that the buyer is paying, what is that? And then it's like, well, I don't know. They don't know. They have no idea. So it's not something to worry about, because when you double close, it costs you a lot of money. So there's a lot of different pitfalls, that could pop up across the way. There's a deal we have right now that we're working, and there's a lot of little intricacies that come up, right? So the title work came in, right? And there was an old mortgage that never got discharged, right? So now, if I had just assigned that away to the buyer and put them in charge, right, I don't know that that's going to get handled, right? Because the title company needs information from the buyer. I'm sorry, from the seller. The title company needs information from the seller. They need the ability to talk to the lender and find out if it's paid off. There's a power of attorney involved, and that wasn't right. So now we got to get a new power of attorney signed by the owner and the power of attorney, her daughter, right? So that all needs to happen. So again, if I was going to rely on somebody else to get that done, it might not happen, right? Let me see. So the process is, so you want me to kind of draw out the process. So first, I get the property under contract with the seller, right? Once it's under contract with the seller, it gets sent to the title company. I'm the buyer, right? Chatto LLC is the buyer. So,
and that's
boom.
Right away. You get it under contract and right off to the title company. Even if you have let's say you don't have an end buyer at that point, would you still send it to the title company?
So if you send contracts to the title company and you don't close just because you don't have a buyer, right? Let's say that's the reason you're not closing. If you keep sending the title company deals that aren't going to close because you don't know what you're doing and you're locking up junk, right? That is not going to be, eventually you're costing these people money. You send the contract, they're assuming you're closing, they're going to start doing title work, right? I know certain title companies have started charging people right up front because they've been getting, these wholesalers come in, they don't know what they're doing and they're getting stuck, right? So if it's a deal that I know is closing no matter what, I'm going to send it in instantaneously and get the title work started, because any problems that come up, we have more time to get them resolved. If it's something where I'm not 100% sure, yeah, I may hold back before I open up the title work.
Now, if you negotiated a fee, an earnest money fee with the seller, would you be sending that deposit into the title company, pretty much as soon as possible as well, or would that kind of hold off? Because that was one of the questions I had, is how does that all play into it, and how would you get paid back that if you find an end buyer? So I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I know that happens at the contract / send it into title part.
Gotcha. So you do need a deposit. So a couple things. So first thing on the deposit is, number one, I see a lot of these people thinking, oh, I should put a $5 deposit, a $50 deposit, like some little dinky deposit. And all that is doing for you now is creating a question in the seller's mind whether or not you're serious. If they get a contract that says $10 earnest money deposit, they're going to see that. If they read it, some don't, but I know people do it all the time. But that's now another oh, why is this guy only putting down $10? Does that sound fishy? That doesn't seem right. Ask any of your friends, any of your family, hey, if you were selling a house to somebody and they wanted to put $10 down as a deposit, what would you think? What do you think they're going to tell you? So I always put a sizable deposit. That being said, right, you should send it in because that solidifies the contract. but at least in New Jersey, it's really a little difficult to record a contract on title, right? So at the end of the day, they're either going to close or they're not, right? And I, to be honest with you, I've had very few sellers follow up with the title company to see that the deposit was sent in.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. So that being said, right, you send your contract into the title company. They send you usually like a receipt. One of the things now that they do though, so this is one of the reasons you want to get it in earlier, especially if it's a good deal. One of the things the title company does, they should do, most good title companies do, is they record a notice of sale, something of that nature. I think it's called a notice of sale. Basically, it's put on public record. So they record something on public record that says, hey, you know, John is selling this to Chatto LLC at this price. And that's recorded. So now if the seller decides, hey, I'm going to not sell it to Chatto and I'm going to sell it to somebody else, that's going to come up on title. Whether or not the next title company does anything about it, I don't know. It expires, I think, in 60 days. It's not forever, but it is an added layer of protection, right? Because another title company is going to run title and say, hey, you're selling it to this guy. Is there more than one contract out there? What's going on? Because technically, seller can't sign contracts with multiple buyers. They do sometimes because they don't know. But yeah, so that's another reason you do want to open title as soon as possible because that gets recorded.
Gotcha.
So then they usually send you some kind of receipt that they got, you know, some paperwork they send. Title companies are a little different, but they send some paperwork saying they got it, who the parties are, and then they have Chatto LLC as the buyer, right? They start the paperwork. A couple days later, sometimes a couple days, sometimes a week, they send back the title commitment, which is this big 60, 70 page document. And that is going to show, you know, it has like, what do you call it? It has all the deeds. It has the mortgages against the property. It usually does a Patriot search on the buyer and on the seller, Patriot Act search, and then it does judgments. Looks for judgments. So if your seller, if their name is John Smith, there's going to be like 50 pages of judgments because it's such a common name. And then the seller is going to have to either, you know, they can usually knock them off with the last four of the social, or the seller has to sign an affidavit saying, hey, those are not judgments against me. It's a different John Smith. Okay. So that comes back. So now you can kind of start the process of getting figured out with the seller, you know, things that need to get handled. You know, hey, there's a mortgage on the property. You know, we're going to need you to get a payoff. You know, start getting in touch with the bank on that. There's there's outstanding water. So that's going to come out of your proceeds of closing because you haven't paid water in 3 years, whatever the case may be. So you have, you know, you get that. And then that's all like stuff you can go back to the seller with. Now, when you have a buyer, it's also good to know what's on title, right? Because if your title's a mess, you don't necessarily want to get it sold because now the buyer's going to be ready to go and title's a mess. It's good to be able, when you're selling it, like, hey, the title's clear, ready to go. We can close in a week. You know, buyers a lot of times like to move fast because they got cash and it ain't making any money in the bank account. So whether or not, depending on your title company and depending on what kind of relationship you have with them, you need to ride the line of how much access you want to give them to your seller. At some point, you got to get them together. But if a title company can, especially one that you're not used to working with, can make some mistakes. I've had title companies consistently, you know, with our example, the contract price is 100, 110 is the, you know, the price you're selling it for to Bob. The title company says, oh, you know, they'll send out a HUD and they'll put 110 and put the assignment fee on the seller side. But no, the price is still 100, you know, so things like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of times they will, it's the word I'm looking for. A lot of times, you know, it's good to get that information first. You know, let the title company know, send me the HUD first, right? Don't send it to everybody. So if you just give the seller's information to the title company, then all of a sudden there's going to be an email, and they're going to email you, they're going to email the seller, they're going to email the buyer, put everybody in touch with everybody, and it can cause for some awkward situations. We had a situation where our buyer wanted to get an attorney. The attorney saw that we weren't the actual sellers because we were doing an assignment. He didn't understand it. So he ends up calling going out of his way to get the information for the seller and calling the seller himself. So the seller is getting a call from this attorney of the buyer, and made for an interesting conversation, but that's why it's kind of good to keep them separated and stay in the middle of the transaction till the end. So once I have a buyer in place, now that I have the buyer in place, I'm going to make sure I get a deposit from them. It has to be non-refundable. Now, you need to find out what your title company's policy is as far as non-performance for the buyer. I've worked with title companies where they will not release the earnest money of the buyer to me unless the buyer signs off on it. So that money gets stuck in like limbo. And I've had other title companies where, yeah, your contract says if they don't pay, you get the money. Perfect. Here you go. So, and that depends on the comfort level, I guess, they have with you, and the comfort level that they have, just with their business and how they operate things and contracts. So that is one thing that
you're saying the money that you initially put up. Well, so I guess you didn't put up money initially. You kind of held off on that. So you got an end buyer that gave you money as a non-refundable deposit, or they gave the title company the non-refundable.
So normally I don't like to personally take the non-refundable deposit to myself, right? Because as non-refundable as it is refundable if there's title issues, if the seller doesn't show up to the table. I'm not gonna take somebody's money if they didn't get what they were kind of planning to get. So I've done that in the past, and I've had to give back big chunks of money. I'm like, this kind of stinks. Let me just get paid when the deal closes. Like, I don't need to have like this outstanding thing out there. So the buyer wires the money to the title company. The issue is now, how does your title company handle that if the buyer defaults? Right?
Okay.
And again, that's going to be so some title companies, like, obviously they want to cover themselves. And if they release the money to you and the buyer argues, well, no, it shouldn't be refundable because of this or that or the other breach or whatever the case may be, now it's stuck, now they can be in trouble because they released the money to you. And now this guy might be saying, no, you owe it to me. So they want all parties to sign off. Yes, this $5,000 non-refundable is going to Chatto LLC because you didn't perform. So that, and again, that's kind of a hard one to go, to navigate, but it is just something to be aware of. So another piece of it, and it's just like a random thought as we're going through this process. So what happens if your buyer bails, right? Now what happens? So if you do a regular assignment, right? Like, you just assign the contract over, the buyer bails. Well, that buyer, Bob, is in default. You're out. You assigned it, you're out. But in reality, the seller's going to look at you, say, hey, you said you were buying my property for $100,000. Now, you're saying there's no funding, the whole deal falls apart, right? So you may even want to step in and buy it yourself at this point. I've done that. I've purchased properties that I really didn't want, just to fulfill my obligation to the seller, right? But if you've assigned it, you can't buy it because you no longer have the rights to buy the property because you've assigned it. So it kind of puts you in a rough situation. We did a deal like this where the buyer, we didn't get a huge deposit because literally our contract price was like $4,000 and the sale price was like $6,000. It was like literally this piece of junk property, right? And he just, like, the day before closing, he's like, yeah, I'm not going to buy it. What? What do you mean you're not going to buy it? Right? So now we had another buyer step in and we wanted to close, but the title company's like, well, no, you assigned it to Bob the buyer. You can't just take that away and assign it to him unless this other guy signs, hey, undo the assignment, so to speak. So luckily he cooperated, but if he wouldn't cooperate, that could be an issue, so I know, my title company has been comfortable with my paperwork that I use so that if a buyer defaults, my contract states, the whole thing's null and void, and I get to keep the deposit. And because I haven't assigned it yet, because that gets done at closing, because my contract says if I want, I can convert this to an assignment. So it's not an assignment yet, if that makes sense.
Okay, so in that case, you have the property under contract with the seller, and it says Chatto LLC and/or signs or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And then you find a buyer. You say, "Hey, got this great deal for you for 110." He's like, "Sure." Everybody would come to closing, and at closing is when you'd say, "Okay, Chatto LLC isn't buying it anymore. It's now this guy." So there's no second assignment contract, or am I off there?
So no, so my contract, like I said, has it that I can convert it to an assignment. So my contract actually says purchase and sale agreement and/or assignment, something like that. I don't have it in front of me, but
yeah, no, that sounds familiar.
So basically, it's to the point where I just, the title company knows I'm going to switch it to an assignment, right? And then it just kind of, I haven't had a title company yet ask me for any other documentation from me saying that, oh, it's going to be an assignment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like if my contract price with Bob is 110, mine is 100. And I think because it says assignment on the top also, they just like, oh, okay. I don't think title companies really read the documents too much, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But very often, they just kind of do things the way they do things. And then you have to correct them.
So before closing, what would you have a document between you and Bob that says that he's buying it for 110? Would that be the second contract?
Yes.
Or okay. All right. And
yeah, that's called the BC
that doesn't
contract.
get signed. Okay. And when does that get signed at closing, or?
No, that gets signed immediately.
Okay.
So there's wording in there that says I don't own the property, right? So my contract with Bob, the BC contract, it says, Chatto LLC is the seller. Bob is the buyer. It says, 123 Main Street. Then it says right in the contract, Stephen, Chatto LLC does not own this property, but has it under contract. And then, so he's saying that, okay, I don't own it, but I have the contract. So basically it gives me the right to either A, buy the property and then sell it to Bob, so double closing, or I can choose to, rather than do a double closing, just assign it directly to Bob so that his purchase price remains the same.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically then I can either buy it and sell it, do a double close, or I can just do the assignment. And I don't do double closes, so it's always an assignment.
And that all
right?
takes place at closing, right? So that would be, you'd have the seller there, you'd have you there, and then the end buyer would also be there to sign additional paperwork, or no?
I do not go to closing.
Okay.
You don't want to go to closing because it gives you an opportunity to lose money, right? Because if you're not at closing, they'll figure it out. If you're at closing, then they're going to look at your fee and want to adjust it from there, right? So a couple things about that. So number one, my contract states the buyer always pays the closing costs, right? All the closing costs. The reason for that is because there's always an argument as to what are the closing costs. Well,
Yes.
does it include recording fees?
Yeah.
Does it include what's included in closing
the taxes?
costs?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if so I specifically say, yeah, taxes are not included. So when I'm talking to a seller, I'm like, look, at closing, and we're going to pay all the closing costs. So number one, any back taxes, you're responsible for taxes up until closing. You're responsible for water and sewer up until closing, right? You're responsible for anything owed on the property, mortgages, right? So you're going to get $100,000. You're going to take out your mortgage, whatever's owed in taxes and whatever's owed in water and sewer, and we're going to pay all the closing costs. So that's what you're going to get, right? So they know if their water's paid, they know exactly what they're going to get. They know how much they're owed on their mortgage. There's no question, because they don't know if it's $200 or if it's $2,000 for closing. They take that away, right? Leaves less arguments at the closing table arguing over what a closing cost is. And on the reverse side, you need to make sure when you're negotiating with Bob's LLC that he knows every single, he's paying for all the closing costs, right? Because if you don't tell him that, he's going to negotiate 110, and then you're going to send the contract to him, and he's going to be confused. Or he's going to say, "Oh, wait, we negotiate 110. Usually the closing costs are split," or whatever the case may be. Now he's going to try to get you down to 109, whatever, so you got to let him know when you're making your offer, you're paying all the closing costs. That's it. And we're using this title company. You don't want to use, the buyer's title company. It can lead to problems. Trust me. You want to use your title company. So let's see, where are they going with that? So basically, at the end of the day, the title company, so that contract is almost like an either or, and you just tell the title company, yeah, it's an assignment, and they do it that way. The assignment fee is always on the buyer side. So usually the seller never even sees it because they're just looking at what their costs are.
So the buyer would know how much he's paying you because he would obviously know what an assignment fee is,
Yes.
but the seller's not going to know that. Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
So when you originally negotiate with the buyer, are you going to just say, "Hey, I got this deal for 110," or are you going to say, "Hey, I got it under contract for 100. Would you be interested in it for 110?" Because he's going to find out either way. So do you just kind of wait for him to find out at closing, or are you upfront and just say,
Yes.
"Here's the deal"?
No, because otherwise he's going to negotiate your fee, right? Now a lot of buyers want to know because to see what they can do, right? So it depends on how good your deal is. They don't care. I've had some pretty big assignment fees, and that just comes from the deal being a good deal. They don't care. It's a good deal, right? And again, you can get into dealing with buyers. It's a whole nother scoop. But as far as the logistics of the transaction, I don't let my buyer know, how much I'm making, and it's really none of his business, right? I've had buyers that oh, you can't make more than this. Okay, well, guess what? Any deal where I'm going to make more than that, I'm not even going to go to you. If my fee's less than that, okay, I'll give you an opportunity. So he lost out on deals because of that. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess
so
I just want to go back to the actual closing itself. So you have contract A, which is between you and the seller, and it says, "Hey, I'm going to buy your property for cash, Chatto LLC." And then you have contract B, which is between you and the buyer, and it says, "Hey, I don't own the property yet. I'm going to sell it to you once I close. So you can either A, double close, or B, assign it." So you have kind of both options there. So you have contract A, contract B. Both are signed, both are executed, and both are at closing. And then at closing, you say, "Hey, it's just going to be an assignment." So how do they take these two documents? One says Chatto LLC, the other says Bob LLC, whatever, Bob LLC. How do they just say, "Okay, well, Chatto LLC's out, so just get rid of contract A, it's now just contract B," or do they merge them? I just feel like there's two separate documents that are arguing or that are contradicting each other.
So those documents don't show up at closing. They're just in the title company's paperwork, right? So they need to have a chain of ownership, so to speak. So then you say, okay, contract A between John and Chatto LLC. But wait, it went from John to Bob LLC. How'd that happen? Oh, there's the second contract from Chatto to Bob, right? So that provides their chain of A to C.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. So
But
okay.
the closing itself is an A to C closing. I'm not involved. That's why I don't need to sign anything. Right? That's why I don't want to be at closing.
Gotcha. Okay, that's making more sense now. Is there they
Yeah.
just it's almost like because so I'm a realtor, so it's the same thing with an addendum. It's like you have this initial contract, and then the lender's like, "Oh, you spelled this wrong." So it's like you just have one little page and say like,
Yeah.
"This now says this," and that's it. That's all that's needed. It's actually rather unofficial. Like so it kind of sounds like the same thing as
Yeah.
like the title company just needs something else to say like, "Okay, Chatto's out. It's Bob now, and Bob's paying
Yeah.
110." And then I guess you would just need to tell the title company or somewhere maybe in this contract B to say like, hey, that assignment fee to Chattel LLC of 10K, right?
Yeah, I mean they do them. Yeah, they got to do the math. I don't put the 10K in that B2C contract.
Okay.
I don't mention the purchase price in that contract, but yeah, I mean usually, when you're going to be in a communication with the title person, right? Say, I'll send them the assignment or the BC contract. I'll send that to them and say, hey, we're assigning it to Bob LLC, and he is going to be a $10,000 assignment fee on the HUD. Boom. Simple as that.
Okay.
But and again, you really need to be in communication with the title company and make sure they're not getting all the parties together. They like to do that sometimes. So, which is, and then again, if you start doing these regularly and you have a regular title company you're using, they're going to understand the process, right? They're going to understand, oh, okay, cool. Chatto's deals. Oh, they don't even look at, oh yeah, all the costs go on the buyer side, When a Chatto's deals, okay, boom. Like they know, a lot of times I'll send in a contract and I'm like, are you buying this or are you signing it? They'll ask me. I'm like, I don't know yet. Right? Because it's a lot harder. There is some paperwork involved for them to change it. They put it all in the system as Chatto LLC, and now, oh no, by the way, it's Bob LLC. And it takes a little bit of work. So depending on, if they ask me, and I know it's going to be an assignment, I'll let them know up front so that they don't put all my information in and then have to change it, right? As they put it into their system or whatever they do. So yeah, and then so like I said, I normally don't go to closing. It's probably good in the beginning if you want to get experience and if you want to get testimonials, because usually it's just the best time to get a testimonial because they got cash in their hand, they're happy, they're done with their problem property. So it's a great opportunity to get testimonials. Number one, and then number two, but like I said, I've lost money, where somebody was arguing, oh, no, the taxes should be a closing cost, that kind of thing. And it's a good idea to get all the paperwork to all the parties before the closing, right? So that there's no arguments at the closing table. So for example, once you get the HUD, which is like the breakdown of all the numbers with a transaction, once you get the HUD, you need to look at it. Does it make sense? Is my assignment fee in the right spot? Is the purchase price right? Do they have they have the taxes on there? If there's a tenant, do they have the rent prorations right? Do they have the security deposit right? How much are they taking out for escrow for water? So all that. So you take a look at all that, and then once you're good with it, usually at that point, you either send it to your seller or your buyer, or send it to them. You obviously you're sending it to them separately, then you get them to approve it, because you don't want them to be at the closing table saying, "Oh no, this is supposed to be here, this is supposed to be there." It just adds to the confusion. So you get that knocked out ahead of time, and then usually a lot of buyers don't even show up to closing. The buyer doesn't need to be at closing because they don't need to notarize anything. Usually, it's just a matter of them wiring funds and electronically signing, the HUD and a couple other things. But the seller needs to be at closing. So a lot of times it'll just be the seller and the title company. So which is why it's a good idea to have a good relationship with the title company, right? So that they're not saying things, so they know what they're saying. They're not saying, oh, there's this assignment fee on there, and like pointing it out and making a big deal of it, And if you're going to be at closing, it's another big thing is to get your buyer, all his docs, you want to have them signed the day before, if possible, right? So you want his money at the title company the day before. And I wouldn't even, put it in the contract if you want. But I usually just tell my buyer, like, hey, you guys wire the money the day before, because I've had too many issues where, everybody's at the closing table and the wire's held up, but the wire's running late. I've had buyers show up and like, oh yeah, I need to wire the money, huh? And it's like, dude, it's 4:45 on a Friday. What are you doing, man? And just like weird things like that. So you get the money wired, you get all the buyer's docs signed, right? So now when you show up at the closing with the seller, right, you can, everything's done. They just sign their papers and get their check. And again, now, if you didn't go and get that HUD approved by them and show them everything and get everything flat, and they turn around and say, oh, this should be this or that should be that, you're not the buyer anymore. So you don't even have like the authority, so to speak, to, make any changes. And you don't have the authority to sign any of those changes, right? So it's a good idea to get everything flushed out ahead of time when possible, as opposed to just everybody showing up at closing and having confusion.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot more sense now. I
Cool.
was getting really confused with the title company part of it, but yeah, it makes sense. So as soon as you have that assignment contract signed and you send it over to the title company and they receive it, acknowledge it, at that point you're pretty much not. I mean, you're not the buyer anymore. So like you're still
you're
involved
still
with
the buyer. Yeah, you're still involved. So it kind of keeps you in the middle. You're kind of basically you're telling them that you're probably just going to do an assignment to these guys. You're not going to do a double close, or you don't plan on doing a double close.
But legally, you have one contract that says you're the buyer, and then you have the other one that says you're assigning your right to another buyer. So legally, are you kind of like it's really on this guy to close because there's a document that says it's his problem now? Like I understand you're still like middlemaning it, making sure everything goes well, but like, are you not technically the buyer at that point as soon as that assignment contract is signed?
You're still, well, I still have the option to buy it and double close. I can choose which option I want to go with.
Okay, I see. All right.
Right.
So you can still say
so
it's
I'm
not really until you
not,
say.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So technically, and again, I'm not a lawyer. It's not legal advice, and probably lawyers would tell me I'm wrong on this and wrong on that, and I'm sure, and that's fine. And lawyers often disagree on things.
Sure.
At the end of the day, it's, doing right by people. You're going to tell some buyer, if you tell a seller you're going to close, like pretty much want to make sure you're going to close. If you're just locking up stuff willy-nilly, you have no idea what you're doing, and then, that's where you could potentially have an issue. That's where you could potentially have somebody come back and say, hey, you know what? You're not even a buyer. You're just, acting like a real estate agent, whatever the case may be. So, again, and if you're in a position right now, like you just bought the first one, right? So it's like, I might have a buyer,
right.
There are people that are, working on getting started, have no idea what they're doing, and also have absolutely no resources. And then, I usually encourage them to work with somebody that has resources that can teach them, where they're putting in some sweat equity. They might be making less on an assignment fee, but they're not, they're learning, right? There's something to be said for learning. And, it's not always about making the most money you can. It's about doing the right thing and making sure you're taking care of who you're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. And following through with your promises.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
Yeah, no, that clears it up for me. Definitely feel a lot more confident with it. I mean, I'm sure there's still little technicalities I'm not getting, but I definitely understand like the steps I need to take. Cause like I even had questions is like, am I even supposed to send this to title until I have an end buyer? Like, am I even supposed to send it to title? Like, am I supposed to like find the end buyer and then they do the title? So like, all that stuff was confusing.
Hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Chat with Chatto. Hopefully it was of value. Hopefully the same questions that Jake had were some of the questions that you had, and hopefully I was able to answer them. Feel free to leave comments below. I'll be able to chime in there and help you. Also, even better, join in the link below to my Facebook mastermind. It's a small private group, and we can chat there. You can chat with Chatto there and get your questions answered. And as always, I appreciate your being here. It's 40 some odd minutes in. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you had it on 1.5x or 2x, so it didn't take so long for you to consume. But all that being said, obviously any YouTuber is going to tell you, click the subscribe button, notifications, and all that good stuff. I'd love to have you. And again, I appreciate you being here. Have a great day.